April 15th, 1931. 1:00 p.m. A black Packard pulled up in front of Scarpato's restaurant on West 15th Street in Coney Island. Two men stepped out. Joe Masseria, 43 years old, wearing an expensive three-piece suit and a fedora, and Charlie Luciano, 34, dressed almost as well. To anyone watching, they looked like successful businessmen having lunch, and in a way they were. Their business just happened to be crime. This story doesn't start at that restaurant. It starts 2 years earlier, with a war. New York's Italian mafia was divided into two factions. On one side, Joe, the boss, Masseria, Neapolitan, old school. He'd been running rackets in New York since 1910. On the other side, Salvatore Maranzano, Sicilian, traditional. He'd arrived from Sicily in 1925 and immediately started building his own organization. They hated each other. Masseria thought Maranzano was an upstart foreigner trying to take what he'd built. Maranzano thought Masseria was a crude street thug with no respect for Sicilian traditions. The conflict became known as the Castellammarese War, named after Maranzano's hometown in Sicily. For 2 years, they killed each other's men. 60 mobsters died in the streets of New York, shot in restaurants, ambushed in cars, found in alleys with their throats cut. The war was destroying both organizations, costing millions in lost revenue, bringing police heat that nobody wanted, and caught in the middle was Charlie Luciano. Luciano worked for Masseria. He'd been with Joe the boss since the early 1920s. He'd proven himself loyal, capable, smart, but Luciano had a problem with the war. It was stupid. Luciano didn't care about Sicilian tradition versus Neapolitan pride. He didn't care about old country feuds and family honor. He cared about money, and the war was bad for business. Luciano had friends on both sides. Meyer Lansky, his Jewish partner, was neutral. Frank Costello wanted peace. Vito Genovese was ambitious and saw opportunity in chaos, but the old bosses wouldn't stop fighting. So Luciano decided to stop them. Both of them. In early 1931, Luciano made contact with Salvatore Maranzano through an intermediary. The message was simple. What if Masseria wasn't a problem anymore? Maranzano understood immediately. They met in secret. In a warehouse in Brooklyn. Maranzano was cautious. He knew Luciano worked for Masseria. This could be a trap. Why would you betray your boss? Maranzano asked. Luciano didn't hesitate, because this war is killing all of us. Joe won't end it. His pride won't let him, but if Joe's gone, the war ends. You become the top boss. I continue running my operations under your organization. Everybody makes money again. Maranzano studied him. And how do you plan to do this? Leave that to me. Just make sure your men don't interfere. When it happens, accept it. Take your throne. But remember our agreement. Maranzano nodded slowly. If you can do this, Charlie, you'll have my gratitude. And my protection. They shook hands. The deal was made. Luciano walked out of that warehouse knowing he'd just signed Joe Masseria's death warrant. Now he just had to execute it. The hard part wasn't planning the hit. The hard part was getting Masseria alone and vulnerable. Joe, the boss, was paranoid. He traveled with bodyguards. He varied his routes. He never announced his plans in advance. Luciano needed Masseria to trust him completely, to let his guard down. So Luciano did something brilliant. He didn't change his behavior at all. For 2 months he was the perfect loyal soldier. He followed Masseria's orders. He reported intelligence. He participated in meetings. He gave Masseria no reason to suspect anything, and slowly he positioned himself as Masseria's most trusted advisor. By April 1931, when Luciano suggested they have lunch to discuss strategy, Masseria didn't hesitate. Sure, Charlie, just us. Good Italian food. We'll talk business. Scarpato's restaurant was owned by a Masseria associate. It was considered safe territory. The owner, Gerardo Scarpato, had been told to close the restaurant to other customers that afternoon. Privacy for an important business discussion. At least, that's what he was told. April 15th, 15 p.m. Masseria and Luciano sat at a corner table. They ordered pasta, veal, wine. Masseria was in a good mood. The war was winding down. He'd lost some men, but so had Maranzano, and Joe believed he was winning. "Charlie," Masseria said, twirling pasta on his fork. "I'm thinking maybe 6 more months. We finish Maranzano, then we control everything. Brooklyn, Manhattan, Bronx, everything." Luciano nodded, smiled. "That's the plan, boss." They ate. They talked about territory, about money, about the future. After the meal, Masseria pulled out a deck of cards. "Come on, Charlie, let's play some briscola while we digest." Italian card game. Masseria loved it. They played for an hour. Masseria was winning. He laughed, slapped the table when he made a good play. Luciano checked his watch. 3:25 p.m. Right on schedule. "Boss, excuse me, I need to use the bathroom." Masseria waved him off without looking up from his cards. Go. When you come back, I'm taking the rest of your money." Luciano stood, walked toward the back of the restaurant, pushed open the bathroom door, and waited. At exactly 3:30 p.m., a black sedan pulled up outside Scarpato's restaurant. 4 men got out. Bugsy Siegel. Wild-eyed, handsome, violent. He'd been Luciano's friend since they were teenagers. Vito Genovese, calculating, ambitious, Luciano's underboss. Albert Anastasia, the executioner, the man who never missed. Joe Adonis, smooth, connected, trusted. They walked through the front door of the restaurant. The owner, Gerardo Scarpato, saw them coming. His face went pale. He'd been told to close the restaurant. He hadn't been told why. Now he knew. The 4 men didn't speak. They knew exactly what they were there to do. Joe, Masseria, was still sitting at the table, still looking at his cards, still smiling. He heard the footsteps, looked up, saw 4 men with guns drawn. In that half-second, Joe Masseria understood. He'd been set up. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward his own weapon. But he was too slow. The first shot came from Bugsy Siegel. Hit Masseria in the shoulder, spun him around. The second shot from Vito Genovese caught him in the back. Albert Anastasia stepped closer, fired 3 times. 2 hit Masseria in the chest, 1 in the head. Joe Adonis fired the final shots, making sure 20 bullets were fired in total. 5 hit Joe Masseria. He slumped forward onto the table, blood spreading across the checkered tablecloth. His hand still clutched his playing cards. Ace of diamonds, 3 of clubs. The 4 men holstered their weapons, turned, walked out of the restaurant as calmly as they'd entered. The entire hit took less than 30 seconds. Gerardo Scarpato stood frozen behind the bar, in shock. The restaurant was silent, except for the sound of blood dripping onto the floor. And in the bathroom, Charlie Luciano washed his hands. He waited exactly 3 minutes, long enough for the shooters to be gone, long enough for it to be believable that he'd heard nothing. Then he dried his hands, straightened his tie, walked back into the dining room. He stopped when he saw Masseria's body. "Joe." He ran to the table, checked for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. He looked at Gerardo Scarpato. "What happened? Did you see anything?" Scarpato shook his head, terrified. "I was in the kitchen. I heard gunshots. By the time I came out." Luciano nodded, looked at Masseria's body one last time. Then he walked to the payphone on the wall, called the police. "There's been a shooting at Scarpato's restaurant in Coney Island. Someone killed Joe Masseria. You should send detectives." He hung up. Then he sat down at a different table. and waited. The police arrived 15 minutes later. Detectives, crime scene photographers, the medical examiner. They questioned everyone. Gerardo Scarpato. I was in the kitchen. I didn't see anything. The cook. I heard loud noises. I stayed in the back. I didn't see anything. Charlie Luciano. I was in the bathroom. When I came out, Joe was dead. The lead detective, Michael Fiaschetti, didn't believe any of them. Mr. Luciano, your boss was murdered 10 feet from where you were. 20 shots were fired. And you expect me to believe you didn't see or hear anything? Luciano met his eyes calmly. I was in the bathroom, detective. The door was closed. I heard loud sounds. I thought maybe a car was backfiring outside. When I came out, I found Joe like this. How convenient. Convenient would be me not being here at all, detective. I called you. I stayed. I'm cooperating. Fiaschetti wanted to arrest him, but he had no evidence, no witnesses, no weapon, nothing. After 6 hours of questioning, they let Luciano go. As he walked out of the police station, a newspaper reporter shouted a question. Mr. Luciano, who do you think killed Joe Masseria? Luciano stopped, looked at the reporter. I have no idea. Joe had a lot of enemies. This is a dangerous business. Then he got into a waiting car and disappeared into the New York night. The next morning, Charlie Luciano met with Salvatore Marenzano in a Brooklyn warehouse. Marenzano embraced him. You did it, Charlie. The war is over. I'm now the boss of bosses. And you'll be my right hand. Whatever you need, you have my support. Luciano nodded. Thank you, Don Marenzano. I'm honored to serve. But even as he said those words, Luciano was already planning his next move. Because Luciano had learned something important from watching Masseria and Marenzano destroy each other. There was no such thing as a permanent boss. There was only the next target. For 5 months, Luciano worked under Marenzano. Marenzano reorganized the New York families, created a structure, established rules. He declared himself boss of bosses, capo di tutti capi. But Marenzano made the same mistake Masseria had made. He started to see Luciano as a threat. Marenzano was old school. He believed in Sicilian traditions. He didn't trust the young Italian Americans like Luciano who were born in America. And he definitely didn't trust Luciano's partnerships with Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. In September 1931, Marenzano called a meeting. He told his inner circle that he was planning to eliminate several young mobsters who were becoming too powerful. The list included Charlie Luciano, Vito Genovese, Frank Costello and Joe Adonis. But one of Marenzano's men, Tommy Luciosi, was loyal to Luciano. He warned him. Luciano didn't panic. He'd been here before. He knew what to do. September 10th, 1931, 2:00 p.m. 4 men walked into Marenzano's office in the New York Central Building on Park Avenue. They wore suits. They carried briefcases. They showed badges that identified them as federal agents. Marenzano, we're with the Treasury Department. We need to ask you some questions about tax irregularities. Marenzano's bodyguard stepped aside. You didn't refuse federal agents. The 4 men entered Marenzano's private office. The door closed behind them. 30 seconds later, gunshots. The 4 men emerged, walked past the confused bodyguards, left the building. They weren't federal agents. They were Red Levine, Bo Weinberg, and 2 other Jewish gangsters hired by Meyer Lansky, hired by Charlie Luciano. Inside the office, Salvatore Marenzano lay dead. 6 bullet wounds, multiple stab wounds for good measure. The boss of bosses was dead. 5 months after Joe Masseria had been killed in a Coney Island restaurant. That night, Luciano called a meeting of all the major mob figures in New York. There's no more boss of bosses, Luciano told them. That system doesn't work. It creates targets. It creates wars. He looked around the room at men who were now his equals. not his subordinates. From now on we're a commission, 5 families in New York, representatives from other cities. We make decisions together. We vote. Nobody is above the organization. It was a revolution. The old mafia, with its dictatorial bosses and blood feuds, was dead. The new mafia, structured like a corporation, was born, and Charlie Lucky Luciano was its architect. All because he'd gone to the bathroom at the right time. Joe Masseria's funeral was attended by hundreds. His casket was covered in flowers. The newspapers called his murder the end of an era. They had no idea how right they were. Charlie Luciano sent flowers to the funeral. The card read, "To my boss, with respect and sorrow, Charlie." Nobody suspected him, or if they did, they were smart enough not to say it. Because by then, everyone in the underworld understood. Charlie Luciano wasn't just lucky. He was untouchable. The Masseria hit became legend. For decades, mobsters would tell the story. The perfect setup, the bathroom alibi, the loyal soldiers who pulled the triggers. And every time they told it, they'd end the same way. And when the cops asked Charlie what he saw, you know what he said? "Nothing. I was in the bathroom." That's how you know you're talking to a real boss. He makes you disappear while he's washing his hands.